am live. Hello. Let's see. Little music on. Hello. 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 Hi, whoever's watching. I'm just putting on a little music here. I was putting on a little music here. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Liz Live. I am Liz Statlander, and I'm a marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor. And tonight we're talking about kind of a fun subject. The subject tonight, and just give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear me okay. I did a sound check, but I like to keep on top of that. Tonight, I want you guys to ask questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like being a therapist. What is the life of a therapist really like? And I think people imagine all kinds of things, and I'm going to bust some of the myths about us therapists, and I'm going to tell some funny stories, and I'm going to tell you all the new and exciting things that we have going on here. So, welcome. Happy Wednesday evening. I am Liz Statlander once again, and welcome to Liz Live. And we are talking about my life as a therapist, and I think the life of any therapist. I get a lot of questions from friends and family and clients, and I think that being a therapist is a very intriguing profession if you aren't in it. I'm not saying it isn't intriguing to be one, because it certainly is, but I will also tell you that it has some really wonderful, exciting moments. It has some really terrifying moments, and has some really sad moments. So, being a therapist, I have a front row view into the dramas of everybody's life. And when people come for therapy, they're not coming to me because things are going really great in their lives. They're coming to me because of a problem. So as a therapist, I meet people through their problems. And a little bit about me, I'm just going to look at the screen because I want to see if anyone's ever been with a younger man asking from a therapist. No, actually, I never have. But if you saw my videos this week, they're pretty funny. So, my producer, and I call her my director of operations, she's so creative. And this week, all of our new reels on Instagram are little funny stories about things that I've experienced as a therapist. But as I was saying, being a therapist is dramatic. I will say that, because we meet people through their problems, and I've seen it all. I used to specialize in couples therapy. I still do couples therapy, but I really, for a couple years, really specialized in that. And there was so much drama going on when you are trying to do therapy with couples. So feel free to ask me questions, even if they seem kind of silly, but not about my personal life. That's not really what we're doing here, but my professional life. And funny and interesting experiences I've had as a therapist. So I'll start at the beginning of my career. because I've had a really interesting career and I've worked in a lot of different places in a lot of different settings. So my very first job was at the Children's Bereavement Center of Miami, and they offered free therapy for children and parents where there's been a significant loss, like a parent, a grandparent, somebody very close to the family. And I worked specifically with ages 11 to 14 or 15. And it was a group therapy setting. And the belief behind their model was that if you put a bunch of children at their particular developmental age groups together who have all experienced a significant loss, that they will automatically, just by the presence of being together, that they will heal. And I'll tell you, it really worked. And we didn't necessarily do therapy when we had a big group. Of course, we would ask provoking questions to see how the kids were doing with the losses. But sometimes we would just hang out and we would play cards and play games. And through that experience, kids would start to feel like they're not alone, like they have other people that know what it's like to lose a parent. And I was somebody that lost my father at 11, so I was the perfect person to work with that age group. And I really loved it. I did that for several years until my studies kind of got in the way. So if you have a grieving child or you know someone who just lost a spouse and has children, I would certainly direct you to go to the Children's Bereavement Center of Miami. It's free support for the community, and they are absolutely phenomenal. So that was my very first job. And a lot of people would ask me, well, weren't you sad? Wasn't it, so sad doing that job? And, in the beginning, I'm not going to lie, definitely I would see these poor little kids come in so bereft and scared and crying, and I knew that I was responsible for making sure that they were okay, and I really knew what they were going through because I was a bereaved child. And so in the beginning it was definitely difficult, but like through the years, any therapist will grow, I say, kind of a skin, or I would say kind of a thicker skin, and a really good perspective. And I think the perspective that they gave us at the bereavement center was not that we were dealing with something so sad and focus on it that way, but rather that we were partaking in something that was helping children who were grieving. And so if you look at it with that lens, that, okay, these little kids tonight who came in and they were so, torn apart and grieving, at least they found a safe place where they can be with other children who have also lost a parent. Because I know when I lost my dad at 11, I felt different than everybody else, and nobody at school had gone through anything like I have gone through. So it felt a little bit isolating, and through a lot of my life, I felt a little different because of that. But of course, that kind of trauma also sets you up to be a really great therapist, and that's pretty much what happened. So after I left the bereavement center, in grad school, we had to do an internship. And I had a really kind of crazy internship because I worked in the psychiatric unit of Aventura Hospital. And this was so many years ago, so I don't know what they're doing there now, but at the time we had 3 units. One was general population, one was a lockdown unit for the severely psychotic and possibly dangerous people, and then there was an addictions unit, and we rotated through all 3 of those units. And that was one of the most, number one, scary things that I had ever been through, and the greatest learning experience I ever had. So when I would go into the lockdown unit, and they would bring interns, residents, young resident doctors and nurses, they would run out of the unit. They could not handle it because it was pretty scary. I had a penchant for it, I suppose, where I was, after a few weeks, I became very comfortable there. I don't know why. I think my instincts really developed there, and I knew when I was in danger and when I wasn't in danger. And there had been certainly, incidents where nurses had been, assaulted. And thankfully, I never was. And we do have, what we call techs, big, large guys that were there at the time to protect us. But it was definitely scary. And if you've never seen mental health and its raw realness, it is extremely overwhelming. And I bet you that most people watching this have never really seen somebody truly psychotic, not up close. Maybe you see someone on the street talking to themselves and, looking kind of, out of it. But to actually be in a unit where I worked for a year with people that were pretty much psychotic and or suicidal was an experience. And I used to come home every day from that place and get on my hands and knees and thank God for my life, because mental illness in its really raw form, meaning mania, psychosis, schizophrenia, where you have people who are completely departed from reality, you never really know what you're going to get. You don't really know what they're going to say, what they're going to do, what their moods may lead them to do. So it's a very unpredictable atmosphere. And I did get pretty used to it after a while. And I'd like to think that my time there that I did help, but it's hard to say, because when people are so psychotic, I would try and give them therapy, and that was literally impossible. There was a lot of funny moments there. I also ran group therapy, and you have to have a sense of humor. And when you get a bunch of people who are all psychotic in a room together and you're giving them group therapy, you just never know what's going to be said. I mean, there were times where we had this one patient there, oh gosh, this is 20 years ago, and he believed that he was both a famous rapper and a famous baseball player. So he would want to play baseball. So I would just go ahead and play pretend baseball with him, but he really believed that we were playing baseball. And he would rap for me, and he really believed that he was a famous rapper. And those were kind of more of the lighthearted, I guess you could say funnier cases. But I also saw cases of people who were catatonic, which was extremely sad. And true catatonia, being catatonic, means that you have absolutely no emotional reaction whatsoever. So when you're sitting there and you're talking to someone who literally is alive and breathing and looks healthy but cannot respond or offer any emotion, it is really quite something to behold, and it's really actually very heartbreaking. And there's a lot of things about being a therapist that are extremely heartbreaking, and working in a psychiatric unit was certainly one of those situations. When people are psychotic, they can be kind of funny because they say really far out things, but it can also be sad and scary. And when you have mental illness like, schizophrenia or real bipolar disorder, nowadays everyone and their mother's diagnosed bipolar, and they're not. But when you really are in a manic state, or you're really so depressed that you cannot get out of bed for weeks at a time, there's nothing funny about it. And it really, it gave me some perspective on life. And even now, as I'm talking about it, I'm feeling so grateful for my life, because when you are mentally ill, you are in your own prison, and there's really no way out of it. We can medicate and we can, tranquilize you for a little while, but that's just a Band-Aid. And oftentimes, just trying to find the right combinations of medications is impossible, very, very difficult. So the only way that people can not be a danger to themselves or others is to have them highly tranquilized. And it's really quite sad. I worked with everyone who in there pretty much was suicidal. It's usually that's what got them in there. So, when you start there as your first job as a therapist, you very quickly grow a bit of a tolerance and a skin and a somewhat of a desensitization, although I don't think I was ever really desensitized. I think it definitely affected me. But again, when you're in these difficult situations as a therapist, you always have to look at what you're doing, the good that you're doing, and the help that you're providing, as opposed to focusing on how sad the situation is. And I think anyone in healthcare will tell you that. But if you don't have healthy boundaries and you don't work on yourself, this profession can suck the life out of you, and it can break your heart, and it can be, I've seen a lot of older therapists not doing so well mentally themselves, and I think it's just the nature of what we do. So I think there's a time frame and there's an expiration date on therapists where, maybe after 15, 20 years, like, maybe find something else to do, or prepare to have other degrees to do other things, because it can be really taxing on you emotionally. So after I completed my year in the psych unit, and I really got my first real experience as a therapist, was in a really hardcore environment, which most people were not getting. In fact, I was one of the first people to ever intern at Aventura Hospital. So I was in the first group. So most of my, colleagues, students, they were working at agencies where they, were in an office talking to somebody. Not that those, that atmosphere couldn't be difficult too, but it was certainly nothing like what I was dealing with. So it was a wake-up call. It matured me a lot and made me incredibly grateful and very passionate about mental health, because there's really, it's a really new field. I think people don't understand that. It's a very new field, and we just don't have the ability to treat, and we don't have psychiatrics that are really, they're getting better, but our psychiatrics are not, they're not great, because with medications, it's a crapshoot. We don't know what's going to work on one person if it's going to work on another. So it was, and to see young people coming in with their first psychotic break, they were a perfectly normal kid, and then all of a sudden they think that they're inside the TV and the people on TV are watching them, and to see the sadness that it brings to the parents is, it's sad, and there's no easy way to deal with it. So as a good clinician, you have to learn to have that skin and that perspective, let's focus on what we're doing to help and improve a situation, rather than focusing on, the sadness and the tragedy of it all. But if you really want to get a feel for, one of the most, I think probably one of the most difficult environments, check out a psych ward. Probably a prison would be the next most difficult. So after I was done at Aventura Hospital, I was really glad to be done. I was there for a year and it was great, but it was enough for me. I was ready to get out of there. It was too depressing after all, and you're inside, and they barely get daylight, because they're unlocked. A lot of them are locked in the unit for safety purposes, and it was wonderful, but boy was I glad to get out of there. So my next job was in private practice, and I worked in a group practice here in Aventura, Florida, and that was a little bit more regulated, a little bit more normal. We were we took insurance, and we had a lot of different programs for people to get therapy there. So I saw a very wide range of clients from all walks of life, literally. I saw people who had nothing and were practically homeless, to extremely successful, wealthy people. And that's when I first started really working on couples therapy, and I was the only couples therapist in that practice. So I actually cried through a lot of it and wished I hadn't become a couples therapist. And I remember one of my first clients was a couple that paid me for 3 full hours of therapy at a time, and it was intense, and all they did was fight. And when you're a couples therapist and you're sitting there and couples start fighting like crazy in front of you, which they do, I've seen it all, which they do, and you're a young therapist out of school, it's very hard to know how to deal with that. And I really didn't know how to deal with it when I first graduated. And I would get very stressed and very anxious. And the energy that it took to sit all day long and work with couple after couple and family after family. And I mean, it's very draining. And in the beginning, you really don't, you think you know what you're doing. And I'm sure I was helpful, but you don't quite have the experience or the maturity that you will gain as the years go by. And that was a great place to sort of get my feet wet into private practice and learn how to deal with couples. And sometimes when couples are screaming so loudly at each other, I would actually have to, jump up and down on a chair. I've had to do that before and yell, stop, and try to get them to see how unproductive it really is to be fighting in therapy. Now, 5 minutes of therapy for me as a therapist is good because I can see how a couple fights and I can see patterns, but that's enough. Then I have to put a stop to it. But some couples, especially in the beginning of my career, it was impossible to control them. And so, it took, I would say, a good 3 to 5 years for me to really hone skills for working with more than one person in a room. It can be very, very difficult. There are times when it can be dangerous. At the time, this is pre-COVID, and when I worked in a group practice, I was often there earlier and later than everybody else, and you never really know what was walking in the door. So as a single female with no one in the office, you need to have safety measures and lock doors and make sure that the first time you're seeing someone, you see them when there's other people there, because you just don't know what's going to happen. Thankfully, have I been stalked a few times? Yes. Have I had clients get mad at me because they weren't willing to do the work and try to just, stalk me and things like, yes, I've had all of that. But to me, that's like, now you just fluff it off. But in the beginning, that can be very stressful too. So I guess what I'm saying so far is that being a therapist is a very stressful job, even though I really love it. And I can tell you that after 15 years of being a therapist, I love my clients. And as time has gone on, and I've been in my own private practice for 11 years now, you get a completely different clientele. So I haven't taken insurance in 11 years. I've always been a cash practice. And in the beginning, I would do therapy for pennies, literally, to get people in the door. And as I built up my practice, you see and experience more and more. But when you have your own practice and you're not taking insurance and people have to pay for it, you're less likely to, not likely, but you're less likely to deal with a lot of the severe mental illness, because people with really severe mental illness often cannot hold up a job, they're on disability, a lot of times are homeless, they get into drugs, and not saying all of them, but it's very common, and that's where the danger comes in. But I've had paranoid schizophrenic clients. I've had couples that'll just make you crazy. I've worked with sex addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics, shopping addicts, gambling addicts, every personality disorder you can think of. And I've heard just about every crazy couple story that you can think of. I've worked with couples who had open relationships. I've worked with couples with multiple affairs in their marriage. I've worked with couples with, at least one affair in their marriage. I've worked with people with severe ADHD, depression, narcissistic personality disorder, borderlines, you name it. Sexual abuse survivors, physical abuse survivors, ex-felons, there's just abusive people where one of the partners became very abusive to their partner in front of me, and I had to throw people out of my office. One time back in Pittsburgh, I had a big problem with a guy who had been in jail for some time, was recently released on, I don't remember exactly, but drug and gun charges, and he had a pretty violent record, and he came in with his wife, and he was getting pretty hot and crazy in my office, and he was screaming, and he was getting up in my face and swearing, and all based upon the relationship with the wife, who was sort of just a sweet, passive, innocent girl. And I'm proud to say that they did break up, thankfully, because he was incredibly abusive, and he was so obnoxious and loud and narcissistic that I actually told him to get the bleep out of my office. And you never know when you are faced with those situations how they're going to react. So there's a lot of components to being a therapist. I mean, I've had to call the police, and just a lot of stuff. And so when I say that we are, witnesses of the drama, we are. And even though as the years have gone on through my practice, and I would say 90% of my clients are awesome, phenomenal, beautiful people who've been with me for many years off and on, and almost like family, there is that percentage that is very much, loose cannon. You don't know what you're going to get. And after a while, I could tell just on a first phone conversation if somebody's going to be a problem or not. And if I hear that in their voice, the way they speak to me, or the way they come at me or address me or demand things of me when it's their first phone call, I can now know I'm not taking this person. And I say, I'm sorry, my schedule is busy and I don't have anybody for you, but let me refer you out. And that's a luxury that you have once you have enough business, but you do really have to think about your personal safety when you're a therapist. And I feel very, very blessed that I never had any really major incidents. When I say, yeah, I've had a couple stalking guys, but they were easy to kind of get rid of. The police, they knew, in my neighborhood what was going on. And so we had a nice relationship, and I felt pretty safe. And I did have a lot of officers of the law as clients. I've had a lot of military clients, people who were in combat. So when I think about it, I've seen it all. I've worked with men who, were sleeping with prostitutes behind their wives' back. I worked with couples where the wife was embezzling money from a company and was having multiple affairs. Just whatever crazy story you can think of, I've seen it, I've experienced it in my office, and I've dealt with it in some way. And of course, aside from all the drama, I did a funny video or two this week about clients that I have who stalk their exes. And usually if I step in and say no mas, they no mas my client. They don't come back because they want to keep doing that, and they want someone to feel sorry for them and not address the issue. And that's more when we get into personality disorders, and that is more common than you think. I've also, now with the internet, cyber stalking, and people have fake accounts and they tell me about it. People bring their cell phones and read me all their text messages. And, I really, I've been exposed to a lot, and I really should write a book about it because I've just seen so many things. And I've worked with so many different kinds of people from all walks of life with all kinds of issues. One of my videos on Instagram this week was about a 13-year-old boy that I was seeing. He was my client, and he just turned around and asked if he could kiss me, that he liked older women in the middle of session. And so, of course, the answer was no. And I had to sit down and really talk to him about it and talk to his parents about it, because I didn't want it to become a problem, because I wanted to be able to be his therapist. But if it was too distracting for him, if he had that big of a crush on me, then he was going to have to find another therapist. So one of the big things you have to watch too as a single female is, your male clients falling for you or wanting to cross boundaries. And there's a lot that we have to deal with because we are in the business of creating very close relationships, or I should say developing, cultivating very close relationships with our clients. So there's trust and there's respect and there's an understanding of what the boundaries are. But when you're a younger therapist, you don't really understand all that's entailed in being a therapist and how to put those boundaries down. It can be kind of scary in the beginning. So I could say that there's been times where I've certainly feared for my safety, although not many. I know I've pissed people off when I have confronted them directly on behavior that was inappropriate, and they'll go crazy, and they all do the same thing. I mean, there's only been like 4 in my whole career, but they all do the same thing, and when you piss them off, they try to write shit about you all over the internet, and even Google knows that they do it, and they just take it down. So, but these are things that you have to learn over time how to deal with. Have I ever had to get a lawyer and police involved? Yeah. But again, that's not the norm. The norm is wonderful, beautiful people that I develop wonderful relationships with, and over the years would think of them almost like a family member. And you go through everything with them, and then you watch them bloom and blossom and grow and get better and achieve and go back to living life. And on that side of it, being a therapist has been the most rewarding, beautiful experience that I could ever dream of having. And I think people want to hear all the crazy drama of who I threw out and who tried to kiss me and who I had to call the police on. And yeah, that's there. It's a very dramatic job. You are like watching a movie every session, basically. But you really, for a good therapist will really do his or her best to connect to their client and really, without judgment, really try to build a trust and an understanding so that the client feels like, at least with me, I like my clients to feel like they're hanging out with a friend. Of course, where there are certain boundaries, obviously, but to hang out with a friend, but so it's that cozy and it's that comfortable, but it's not a judgmental situation. And it's very hard to find a good therapist. And I do think I'm one of them. I think that I was born to be a therapist. I think I'm a natural. I can always get better. I'm not saying I'm the best, but I'm great at what I do. And that's confidence that I've gained over the years and largely seeing how well my clients do. And I'm not attributing that to me because, no healer really heals in a sense. We're here as a mirror to help our clients sort of look at themselves and decide whether they want to raise themselves up to a new way of thinking and being. And so the clients really do the healing. But I do think that being a good, caring, mature, experienced, laid back, non-judgmental therapist can make a huge difference. And I say that from, I've gone to therapy myself. And I definitely learned from every therapeutic experience that I had, but I can't say that, looking back, that any of them were life-changing. I mean, I guess they were in some way, but I never felt a closeness with them, and I never really ever told them everything. And I noticed that with my clients, they really share. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's because I work so hard to cultivate an atmosphere where they feel like they can be honest and they can share everything. And when they do that, then I know I'm doing a good job. And something that I think therapists, there's a lot of stigma about us out there that we're all like analyzing everybody all the time and we're making all these judgments. And I can't speak for other therapists, but I can speak for myself that that's definitely not the way that I work. I'm very collaborative, which means I work together with the client to heal that, to help them heal. It's a collaboration, it's a co-creation, something that we do together, as opposed to me sitting there and telling them what to do. That is not the type of therapy that I do, and I'm not sure it's always the kind of therapy that's very helpful. I think when you're looking for a therapist, if you are looking for a therapist, you want one that you feel is a real person, that isn't a puppet behind a notebook, someone who's engaged in what you have to say and engaged in your life and shows that they care, and can really serve as a mirror, but also can connect to what you're thinking and gets you and is able to sort of ask the right questions in order to get that healing dialogue moving. So I believe that conversation can change lives. A good therapeutic conversation or dialogue, which is essentially a session, has and will continue to change lives. So if you can bring yourself to give it a shot, I think you'll be very pleased with myself. Now, I've had experiences and I've heard of other people's therapeutic experiences that fit more the stereotype, that they weren't paying attention, they were rolling their eyes. I've had people tell me their therapist fell asleep, which I can understand to a degree. When I used to work and see 10 people a day, it's exhausting. I don't do that anymore. But when you're starting out, it's rough. And I think therapists deserve a lot more credit than we get, because our job is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And probably most people become therapists because they care about people. And it's an art. And is everybody going to blow your mind? Nope. Is every therapist you try going to be a match for you? Definitely not. But now that there's social media, you can, I do a lot of stuff on social media so you can get a feeling for who I am. And I put a lot of information out there so you can kind of see how I think and the way I deal with things. And there's no reason, if you have a session with a therapist or two and you are not feeling it, there's no need for you to continue, because it's not going to do you much good. If you don't feel comfortable and you can't be honest and you can't be yourself in a therapy session, then, what's the point, right? And so on the other side of therapy, as far as my life as a therapist, in order for me to keep my sanity through these years, it's challenging. I have to take really, 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 really good care of myself. And sometimes I forget to do that, but I have to get a lot of sleep. I have to have a lot of fun. I have to have things that I do that I enjoy, where I'm not thinking about my clients. I have to work on being in great physical shape in my mind, because when you're in good physical shape, your mind is clearer and you have more stamina, and you need those things in order to keep yourself healthy. So being a therapist, I can say in some ways, as you get older, it gets a little easier, because you kind of get to the point where it's like, okay, there's not much you haven't heard of. So you kind of know how to treat certain cases very, very quickly and a little easier, but it never gets any less draining. And I do 1.5-hour sessions. So for me, I can only see so many people a day because that's all I'm willing to do at this point. And, and I don't think my prices are off the charts or anything, but I have to charge a little bit more because I can only see so many people a day. But in my therapy, my sessions are 90 minutes, so you don't really need to come every week. I tell a lot of people come every other week, come once a month. You don't have to come every week unless you're really in crisis, then come every week, come twice a week, depending on what you need. Another thing I've really fallen in love with doing is addiction therapy. And I developed my own you call it a virtual rehab program, but it's not really rehab in the traditional way we think. But I do virtual sessions every day for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, 6 months, whatever we need to help people quit whatever they're addicted to. Now, there's parameters since I'm not a rehab agency. I can't detox people, and I don't really work with hard drugs because of the detox component, but I work with a lot of problem drinkers. I would say I work more with abusers than severe addicts. So, but I've done a little bit of everything. So I work with alcoholics, drug users, shopping addicts, sex addicts. Like I said, I've pretty much food, eating disorders. I've seen it all. So on my life, I try to keep peaceful and fun. I meditate every single day. I am very physically oriented, so I ballroom danced for 4 years in a competitive format, which is something to keep my mind on me and not the work that I do. And you have to learn that when your clients are coming to you for help and they're going through hard things, of course you're going to feel with them to some degree, but you also have to be able to understand that you can't take on everybody's problems and bring it home with you. You really have to learn over the years how to boundary yourself emotionally, and it's not easy. And I credit my graduate school for doing a brilliant job at that. And the time I spent in our doctoral program, we did boundaries for like a year, and thank God. Or, I don't know if I would still be a therapist. Let's put it that way. So it's not an easy job. Somebody's got to do it, and I love doing it. And I love helping people. That's my favorite thing to do. And I love seeing people make changes in their lives because it's never too late. And it's just never too late. It's just never too late. Sometimes you have to begin again many times in your life, begin and begin and begin. But it's nothing, change, whatever painful time or experience you're going through. I've probably have seen it before, have felt it before. I'm a real person with my own set of problems. I don't come to the table like, everything's perfectly fine in my life and I've never had issues. That's not at all my approach. So it's never too late, and whatever you're going through is temporary. So there's no shame in reaching out for help. And, when it comes to reaching out to somebody like me, I do really, really care. And I do a lot of mental, spiritual, and physical fitness on myself to make sure that I'm staying in good shape and that I can do a great job with my clients and not fall asleep on them. So that's a little tidbit into what's it like being a therapist. I think that if you're more interested in hearing more about, the life of a therapist, that would probably be the best format. Would probably be to see me on a talk show or something like that, being interviewed, and having people ask me the question. So I'll just check and see if anybody asked anything. I don't think. Let's see. I don't know if I'm not seeing. Oh yeah, they did. Okay, so let's see. Before I go, what's happening on the screen? Okay, so wait, where'd it go? Live chat. Okay. Stephen King, JJ, hello, The Running Man, Stephen King. Ever been with the, okay, yeah, no, we're not. No, I've never been with a younger man. Okay, wait, what happened to my, I saw Meredith. Hi, Meredith. That's my great, dear, lovely friend. Lindy, hi, Lindy, and hi, oh God, I'm so blind. What does this say? Watching from Kenya. Wow, that is so wonderful and so flattering. Well, nobody really asked me any good questions, so maybe next time around you guys will think of them. But I'm gonna wrap it up and let everyone go enjoy this beautiful Wednesday evening. Have a wonderful, beautiful rest of your week. I will see you back here next Wednesday, and I believe we're talking addiction next Wednesday night. So that's going to be a really good show. And please follow my social media. Please follow me on Instagram. All my links are right here on my YouTube station. Please like and subscribe, share with friends. If you know somebody that needs help or you feel like you need some help, don't be shy to reach out and set up a session with me. It would be my honor and pleasure to meet with you. So see you back here next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. We're going to talk about addiction. So get your questions ready and don't be shy to participate. Thank you. Love you all. Good night.